fun to spend. It's not Today we'll be talking about some strength training and what is the most optimal way to build your strength. Of course, there are so many programs out there, so it can be hard to choose the right one for you. But instead of going through all of them, because that would take us the whole day, let's talk about some basic strength training principles so you can decide for yourself which program is the right one for you. But without further ado, let's get right into it. So, how do you become stronger then? The first principle is the principle of overload. You have to be lifting more than you're lifting today to be able to lift more tomorrow. Because hard training is smart training when it comes to strength training. That sounds simple, right? Just lift more so you'll be able to lift more tomorrow. It has to have the component that's progressively harder for your body to be able to make those adaptations, because otherwise if you just lift the same weights you will become stale at some point and just be able to do what you're doing right now and not increase your strength. So first principle, overload. Second principle of strength training is specificity. Specificity. You have to be specific to your sport. So it's not the size of your guns that decide how much you can weigh. Because we all know that the bodybuilders, although they look strong, they are not the strongest people in the world. So you have to be specific to your sport. And in strength training, that means moving in the rep ranges from 6 reps all the way down to 1 rep. And general strength is best built from 6 to 3 reps. And that is the range where you should be moving in if your main sport is something else than powerlifting and you don't necessarily want to build your 1 rep max, you just want to become stronger. Then doing from 6 reps to 3 reps is the sweet spot for you. But if you want to increase your absolute maximum to lift the 1 rep max in back squat or deadlift or whatever, then you also need to work from 3 to 1 rep. And that is the area where you will be peaking those qualities that you have developed with the general strength training. And you also need to be specific on your exercise selection. If you want to become better at back squats, you need to be doing exactly the back squats. Of course, it's good to do other exercises as accessory work to the back squat. And that is the third principle that we'll be talking about, which is variety. You need some variety in your training to avoid staleness. Because if you do only the same exercises all the time around the same rep ranges, your body can get used to that stimulus and over time you will become stale at some point. And to avoid that, it's good to have some variety in the rep ranges but also in the exercises that you're doing. If you do a certain squat variation, that might also help to build a specific weak spot that you have in your squats. So one example could be the pause squats. So instead of bouncing off the bottom, which is useful if you want to lift the maximum weight, you pause at the bottom, and in that way you need to be very stable on the bottom, and it teaches you how to get out of that hole. So when you do use that bounce, you're even stronger when you get out of it. Of course, that's not specific, but it adds the variety that you need if you become stale at that point. Then the fourth principle of strength training is phasing. So we talked about that a little bit already. So you need to be focusing on certain qualities at one time. As we said, that it's not the size of those guns, but you still need the muscles to build your strength. So you also can benefit from having that hypertrophy block in your training, which means that you are not necessarily building your strength, but you are building bigger muscles. And then in the next phase, you will go to the strength phase and you will learn to use those bigger muscles to produce more strength. What that means in practice is that you could have first a few weeks block where you're just doing hypertrophy work in the rep ranges of 6 and upwards. And then after that block, you move down to the general strength training and learn to use those bigger muscles better for producing the strength. And then the final block would be the peaking. So then you would just do from 3 to 1 rep in that range to really hone in those qualities and learn to lift at 1 rep max in the most optimal way. Okay, we are already seeing that some of these principles are conflicting a little bit. So on the other hand, you need to be super specific to what you're trying to achieve, but then you also need different phases and variety. So what's going on? The same thing as with any training, it's about balance. You need to be balancing different principles to have the most optimal results. And that will get us into the 5th principle of the strength training, which is fatigue management. Although we said that hard training is smart training, you cannot be training super hard all the time, because if you're training over your body's ability to recover, at some point that can lead to overtraining. Although you need to be able to train harder that your body can sustain in a short term, you still need to be able to recover at times, and that's where fatigue management comes into place. And in strength training, that typically means that having a specified period where you're having a easier training period. For example, you could be training hard for 3 weeks straight, and then you have 1 deload week to clear out that fatigue, reset your system, and then you're ready to go again after that deload week. And during those 3 hard weeks, it's super important to actually train hard. And that's called functional overreaching. So you're actually training harder than what's your body's ability to recover. During the first week, you're still feeling kind of good. Second week, you're already kind of feeling the stress on your body and the fatigue starts to accumulate. And then the last week, you see that you're no longer recovering the same way that you were before, and the fatigue starts to build up, but you still train super hard because you know that the next week will be easier. And right now we get into the last principle, which is individual differences. And this is where it gets harder. And that's the reason why most of the general programs that are out there are maybe not the best one for you, because they are written for the general public, the general person, but nobody is general. Nobody is in the middle of the pack. There's always a lot of individual differences that have to be taken into account when designing the optimal program for you. For example, if you're a smaller lifter, a smaller female lifter versus a heavier weight male lifter that is typically capable of lifting heavier weights, they need to be doing a lot less volume at very much higher intensity than what the smaller female lifter would do. A lot of more volume in lower intensities, because it's not just the relative intensity that creates the fatigue, but it's also the absolute intensity. So if the heavier weight is lifting doing squats at 200, and then the smaller weight class lifter is doing it with 100. The smaller one is much more capable of recovering from that fatigue than the bigger one. Then other differences is that what is your actual goal? Is the strength training your main sport? Do you have other stressors that affect your training? That means that you need to reduce the volume and intensity that you're doing. Then also, what is your life outside of the training? Do you have a lot of stressors from work, from school and stuff? Those will affect your ability to recover, and then again, drop the volume that you are able to do. And that's why you always need to consider all of these things when deciding whether the program is the right one for you. So I've been having this injury on my elbow for past couple of weeks, and that's limiting quite a lot what I can do right now. And I've been basically doing only jerks, because that's the only exercise that doesn't hurt too much. I can't do cleans, I can't do snatches, front squats to some extent, back squats maybe a little bit, but they hurt as well. And only basically anything that's pulling, pushing kind of movements. And I took a bit different approach to the jerks this time. I thought that why not go as specific as I can, and basically only doing maxes. So every time I go do jerks, I build it up to my 1 rep max for the day, and that's basically all the training. So this was inspired from the Bulgarian way of weightlifting. Of course, it's not the real Bulgarian, because then I would be training to my absolute max couple times a day, training every day, and basically doing nothing else. And then of course that would have to be my profession as well. And in a lot of cases, those Bulgarian weightlifters that dominated the 70s and 80s in weightlifting, they were basically taking performance enhancements as well, which enabled them to train that much. Although it seems like a kind of dumb approach to just try to build for maxes, because it's not very sustainable in the long term. But at the same time, I wanted to experiment with that, because there is some reasons why it might be a good way to do a little bit of a Bulgarian type of everyday maxing program for a little bit. So I'm not planning to do this for like years, but maybe a month or two, and use it as a peaking block in my general training. So as mentioned before, the phases that you have in your training is one block of strength training, and also holds true for weightlifting, that you should have different periods where you're focusing on different qualities. And right now, if I want to peak to my absolute maximum at this stage, then this type of training could be useful. I don't know. We'll see. That's what I'm about to find out now with this little experiment. If it's worth it, or if it just creates too much fatigue, because it's really taxing for your system to build for maximum. And it also requires quite a lot from your head if you want to go for the absolute maximum effort every single time that you're at the gym. Because even when you're not feeling it, you need to build for the maximum of that day. And that also means that you will get a lot of missed lifts, which is not a good thing, because that might teach you some really bad habits when it comes to lifting. Because also technical mastery is one of the key components of weightlifting, that you should be mastering the technique before going to higher weights. But I love to send it, so that's why that's probably the main reason why. Who am I kidding here? That's probably the main reason why I want to do it, because it's just fun to send it, and that's what we are about to do today as well. So let's see how far today